Well, thank you all for joining us. Senator Craig Brandt as usual. And we have a couple of people with us today that I'd love to introduce. And we're on episode 34 of the Roundhouse Rundown. I've got with me today Carlos Garcia from Garcia Automotive Group and Ken Ortiz from the Association of Auto Dealers. Ken, tell us a little bit about what the association does and
Sure, Senator. Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. Very happy to be here. The New Mexico Auto Dealers Association is a trade association that represents the franchise auto dealers in New Mexico. We have about 120 separate dealerships in New Mexico, and what the association primarily does is it provides support in representing the dealers as it pertains to legislative matters, federal regulatory matters, any type of compliance. The dealerships have to comply with all types of federal and state regulations, and part of our group is making sure that our dealers, number one, are aware of the laws and basically comply with those laws that have a lot to do with protecting the consumer in their second biggest investment, most of them in their life cycle.
And so today we're going to talk a lot about this EV mandate that's come down from the Environmental Improvement Board. Mr. Garcia, tell us a little bit about, your family has operated an automotive group for a long time here.
Yeah, we've been in business for 90 years this year, so we've represented just about every franchise and make over the years, and we're very fortunate to do business here in New Mexico in a community that's been very, very good to us, and we take a lot of pride in the fact that we're from Albuquerque, and we go to work every day with our team members trying to take care of our customers and be the best community members that we can be.
So last week we talked a little bit about the new requirement for residential homes as well as businesses, where it talks about putting in the plugs for charging, and I talked a little bit to P&M about how it's almost impossible to comply with even that because we don't have the infrastructure for it, quite frankly. And now we want to talk a little bit more about, a few months ago the Environmental Board came down and put in these requirements. I think it's by 2027 that 43% of the vehicles that you order, not that are sold, but that you order, have to be EVs.
Right.
Did I get that right? Is how that works?
Yeah, and the scary part is the 43% by 2027 is one part of it, but it's 82% by 2032, so it quickly jumps from there. So, that's something that I think gets left out of it a lot. But, right now we're at, what are we, 6%?
4%.
Oh, 4. Yeah, we're at 4% EVs in New Mexico total right now, after we've been told for the last 2 years that the sales are just skyrocketing and they're going to go through the roof. We're at a whopping 4%, and that's where we were last year and where we were basically the year before. So, it has to go up 1,000%, and we're in the 2025 model year right now. So sales would have to go up 1,000% in EVs for us to just hit that 43% threshold, which it's impossible. Even anybody with any common sense can tell that that's not going to happen.
And as a customer, for me, it's, first of all, I don't have the equipment in my home to charge it. Secondly, I don't, I do a lot of long distance traveling. My family lives in California, so I drive there. I'm not going to do that on an electric vehicle. Right. I might do that with an EV, and with a hybrid, right, but not with just a flat EV.
And like I tell my customers, we're in the EV business. We know it's part of our future, and our dealers, Ken can speak behalf of them, but our family, we've spent, millions of dollars in investing in the EV future for our franchises, and not just in equipment and infrastructure, but in training and the actual charging stations and everything at our dealerships, and forklifts to move the batteries around, and all the training, special equipment, computers. We're invested, and we want it to be successful. We know that it's going to be a major part of our future. I actually was the first dealer in New Mexico to have an EV charger in my dealership, and that was when we represented the smart car for Mercedes-Benz. So we've been front runners on it, and I think just about every dealer, when we've been, most of them have come, the manufacturer telling you have to do it, but I don't really see anybody that just says no. Right. I haven't seen that happen. So all of our dealers that have a manufacturer's requirement to have EV charging stations in their dealership have done it, to my knowledge. So we know it's a very important part of the business. We love those customers, and we get more and more educated every day on EVs. I sell a lot of the Cadillac EV, the Lyriq, which is a fantastic car. But EVs just aren't for everybody, right? So same thing with the hybrid, same thing with the truck, same thing with the sports car. An EV is no different. My job when I talk to a customer, I've been selling cars since I was 12, is to find out what is going to best suit the customer's needs, and that's where we're going to go. And so for people that an EV works great for, that's fine, but it doesn't work for everybody. And right now, the numbers speak for themselves. It looks like they're only working for 4% of the car buying public in New Mexico. And you mentioned hybrid, which is, in my opinion, is the logical stepping stone to attacking the tailpipe emissions issue, which is really what all this is centered upon, right? We all want cleaner air. I want cleaner air. Ken wants cleaner air. The dealers want cleaner air. When you look at all the effects of an EV, you're not really at the end of the day getting cleaner air. But if we're just looking at tailpipe emissions, which is what the proponents of this issue will tell you it's all about, is tailpipe emissions, a hybrid doesn't have the range anxiety and charge anxiety issues that you have with a full EV, yet it gets much better fuel economy, and it's cleaner, and it's only slightly dirtier than an EV. But until you address these infrastructure issues, not just in New Mexico, but across the country, a hybrid, if everybody replaced their cars right now, I saw your truck out there, if we went to a hybrid, F-150 or hybrid Nissan or hybrid Toyota, whatever it is, you're going to get better fuel economy that's cleaner. So if we replaced everything right now with a hybrid, we'd be in a much better position. But we're trying to go from the mix of what we have now to all EV, which is untenable for anybody. It's not working in California. It's not gonna work, and it certainly can't work here at these numbers. So that was really our argument, was not that we don't want to support EVs, but and I feel like the EPA and the government really did the other 49 states a disservice by saying either you follow California or you stick with the national standard for emissions control. Well, there's no other state that resembles California in any way. I mean, 1 in every 8 Americans lives in California. Their average income is, more than double what it is here. The average driver in California drives 12,000 miles a year. Our average driver drives 16,000 miles a year. They've been at it for many years. They've spent hundreds of millions of dollars in EV subsidies. We've still spent zero. New Mexico is still giving out $0 despite the huge promises that we heard from our legislators and the governor. They passed a very meager incentive that they said was going to be earth-shattering. It was nothing that was going to help us sell a car. I think it's $3,000, but it was supposed to go into law in May 15th, but they still haven't put the program together. So and that's a whole. We could do a show on that. I'm sure you could do it on all the other state programs that don't get done properly. And I'm not picking on anybody, but if we're saying we're going to go and give these great incentives and move the needle, and when I was asked by the head of the Sierra Club, what did she think? What did I think it took to move these cars? I said, ask for a $15,000 EV incentive, because the states that are actually moving cars, that's what it takes.
Wow.
It takes $10,000 to $15,000 on the front end of the deal for a dealer to be able to sort of whet the appetite of somebody to get them to consider an EV and actually go through with the transaction. So those cars that qualify for the $7,500 government EV subsidy, that's great, but that's not every car. So you need something on all EVs, and that type of incentive is really what it takes. So I said ask for 15 and hope to get 10, and we got 3. And then 1 year or 2 years, that reduces to $1,500. I mean, it's nothing. A $3,000 incentive, especially in today's market with interest rates where they are, that's really not affecting somebody's monthly payment very much. And then you've got to look at what their situation is for charging at home.
Right.
And then what you're talking about with construction, I obviously have a huge concern in that. We're the largest real estate owner in downtown Albuquerque, but we know that it's not going to be too far out when the government's going to say we've got to go retrofit every building and parking space and parking garage that we own. We know that's coming. And on new construction, you know, you want to build some apartments, you're going to have to give up, because in reality, anybody that I know that's successful in business and especially in real estate knows parking is number one, right?
Yep,
That's
right.
really all that matters. And so in the car business, it's huge because you're not renting offsite space for parking and service. Look at the dealers in California, what they have to charge themselves to, you know, park cars, and they have offsite locations. But in real estate, it's all about parking. So if you've got to cut up 30% of your parking lot to build EV charging stations for EVs that these people don't have, how does that make any sense, right? Then you don't have enough parking spaces to meet the code in your building, and the thing doesn't cash flow. Who's looking at this stuff? I mean, it's just simple math. But if we've got to give up a ton of our ground and property for charging stations, that's just it just makes no sense.
I would say who's looking at it is probably a bureaucrat who's never owned a business. So,
Yeah.
and Ken, is this similar to what you're hearing from all the auto dealers?
Absolutely, Carlos hit it on the spot. You know, I want to stress that our franchise dealers in New Mexico are not opposed to EVs. They've invested millions of dollars in the charging stations, the tools, the training. What we oppose is government mandates. The government telling New Mexicans what type of vehicle to buy. Vehicles should be purchased by New Mexicans based on their budget, their needs, their lifestyles, what they need that vehicle for, and not, you know, some appointed board. The legislature didn't even have a chance to weigh in on this.
Exactly.
Where, in my opinion, you know, the 112 legislators in New Mexico are elected by the people to represent the people, but they weren't part of this. It was through a rulemaking process that, in effect, becomes law. And one of my biggest concerns is that the average New Mexican is not aware of these mandates that are going to be coming to effect in just a year and a half. So when it's time to buy their vehicle of choice, they may not be able to find it. Some of the manufacturers in other clean car states, New Mexico is the 12th state to adopt the rules. Mm-hmm. 2 other states that previously adopted them have rescinded them because of the lack of demand and the lack of infrastructure out there. So some of the manufacturers in these clean car states have stopped stocking traditional vehicles. So if a consumer out there wants to buy just a traditional diesel pickup or gas-powered engine, they could go down to their dealership, if you will, and those vehicles are not going to be in stock.
So let me ask you, as a customer, could I go down and special order it, or am I just going to have to go to Texas and buy it, or another state?
If you go down to a dealership, the dealership should be able to special order the vehicle. That
But
may
wouldn't
take
that cut
about
into the
6 months.
43%?
Yes, it may take us 6 months. What we see and what we're seeing in other states is in-state consumers are leaving out of state to purchase a vehicle of their choice from an out-of-state dealership, bringing it back to the place that they basically work or reside, which in effect, you know, has a detrimental effect on New Mexicans, from small businesses to jobs to even the taxes the
Really
state
on the
collects.
entire community.
Yes.
You know, I've lived back in New Mexico this time for 20 years, and I've never bought a vehicle anywhere but New Mexico. That metro area is the only place I've ever bought a vehicle. I've bought one from your Cadillac. I've bought one from, but I'm not going to buy an EV. I drive too far on distance trips, and the EV trucks, you know, the Lightning's probably the most popular one, and it can tow 70 miles. I tow a travel trailer. What am I going to do? Stop every hour and charge for 2? It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, a hybrid would be great as long as it's going to cover the tow load. Mm-hmm. But for someone like me, I would have to go out of state and buy a vehicle. I'd really be forced to, and then that's going to hurt the entire community.
Right. So you bring up 2 very important points there, and these are really, if your listeners take 2 things away from this conversation, it should be these 2 things. The first one is, and I tried every which way I could to make this point to the EIB and to the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Air Board, is people speak with their pocketbooks, right? And they're going to buy the type of vehicle that they want and they need. For you, it's a truck that can tow and carry a payload in the bed, plain and simple. That's your lifestyle. You make your money, you're free to spend it however you want. Right. But in a couple years, when you can't get that car here in New Mexico because we're having to stock all these EVs, we're not getting the gas powered vehicles. Those cars are gonna be gone. They're gonna sell well before they hit the lot. So I tried to explain this several times. Everybody knows how difficult it was to buy a car in COVID, right? Everything was sold before it came into the lot. Cars were sold out for 2 and 3 years, especially the popular models, and most dealerships were charging a premium over the window sticker price, which our family didn't do. We don't believe in that. We've never done that. I'm not criticizing the dealers that did.
Sure.
You know, sometimes I wish we had, because we left a lot of money on the table, but we thought, you know, we've been in business a long time. We need to take care of our customers. We're just not going to do that. But basically, that type of effect where those prices went absolutely crazy is going to happen when the mandate comes, because you're going to have, you know, 10 people for every one car, right? And so whatever the best deal the dealership can make, that's who they're going to sell the car to, right? So now, so you have that, and then the same exact effect, which is an unintended consequence of the EVs, is used car prices went through the roof. Well, if you go and trade your truck in Arizona, I'm not going to have your truck to sell to somebody else. Now, the truck that I do get on trade, that price is going to go way, way up, right? And who's buying used vehicles? Traditionally, people with lower incomes or people that have these certain needs in cars. So the prices are just going to go through the roof. Our supply of used cars is going to go to nothing. And no one thought about this. And that's the same thing in California and these other EV states. The prices just absolutely are going to go out of control on new cars that are gas powered and on used cars. It's going to be just like COVID, but way worse, because at least in COVID, the new cars that we were getting, while it was a smaller number, were still the cars that people wanted. So now, you know, we're going to be getting, in a couple years, it's going to be 1-to-1 EV and gas. So I've got to sell an EV to get a gas car is basically what it's going to be. Or I have to sell 8.5 EVs to get 10 gas cars in just a couple years. So it's going to continually get worse. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, and this is the key that I think I explained it in a way that everybody can understand, regardless of which side you're on. But like I said, you know, consumers speak with their pocketbooks, and the car buying public in New Mexico does the same. Until there is an EV that can do what the Ford F-150 does, gas powered, there's no conversation to have, right? So we've seen automakers basically go out of business, and we've represented some of them that have made these bold claims that they're going to go all in on EV. Well, they've all backtracked now. We can talk about that if you want. You know, well, where do you see that? I mean, it's on the cover of the Wall Street Journal every day, but every major auto manufacturer has heavily scaled back their EV plans. Some have said that we're all in, have said we're not going to do any more on EVs. And I'm talking Ford, General Motors, Honda, Toyota, Stellantis, Volvo, who was the first one to go in, Mercedes-Benz that we represent, all these things. But so the Ford F-150 is an example that I use because everybody in New Mexico can relate to it. It's been the #1 selling vehicle in New Mexico for 30 some years, right? For a reason. It's a great truck, and it meets the needs for a lot of people. Ken drives one. Hopefully he buys his next car from me, but until we have something that replaces the F-150 in terms of how far you can go on a charge, what you can do on a tow.
Absolutely.
But we have one of our board members who's a Ford dealer, and this guy is a great Ford dealer. They've been in business for 60 years, and he was the first one to really jump into the Ford charging system. But in cold weather, your 70-mile tow range cuts to 30. You put two people my size and Ken's size in there, the range of the truck drops tremendously. You know, I'm not even talking about what happens when the batteries die and these things become paperweights and they're not recyclable. I'm not talking anything like that. But until you have an SUV like a Honda CR-V or Toyota RAV4 that sells a ton, or an F-150 that they sell a ton of, until you have cars that replace and fit into the lifestyle of people now, there's nothing to talk about. And I can't really make it any simpler than that, but that's really where it is. And so the auto manufacturers are trying, and I applaud Ford for what they've done, and the Lightning's a cool truck, but it does not do what a gas or hybrid F-150 does. It's not close. The Ford dealers will tell you that. So that's the reality of the situation. Now, in 2 years, is that going to be different? Yes. In 5 years, is it going to be different? Yes. I don't know if it's going to be a whole lot better. And
Right.
someone out there is coming up with something better than an EV solution right now. Whether, my brother's a huge believer in hydrogen fuel cell. There's other people working on other projects. I don't personally see how EV can achieve these targets and get where, supposedly we're trying to get to as a country. But when you don't have something that replaces what people want as a one-for-one trade for the same amount of money with the same amount of use, it's just not going to work. And so when we had filed a motion for stay just to take a break and let everybody sit back and look at this thing as opposed to doing it in the rush manner that we had to, which we can talk about. But the day before we had our appeal hearing, the EPA and the Biden administration basically cut their EV targets in half. And so I had a very long talk where I was going to go up and talk to all my points, and I just said, board members, I don't need to say anything. The EPA did it for us. Yesterday, them and the Biden administration, who we're all supposed to hold in a very high regard regarding these environmental issues, they cut their numbers and their targets way back. So if the EPA and the Biden administration can do that, isn't that a good indicator that maybe as New Mexico, we jumped the gun a little bit too? Let's just put these on hold, give everybody some cover from this, and then let's look and see what the alternatives are. But no, we're New Mexico and we know better. We lost that hearing, but the EPA cut it. So we're gonna have more stringent standards here, right? And the government and the EPA said, we came at this way too strong. But in New Mexico, where we've been researching this for 6 months, we know better.